Scientists found that 95% of people who procrastinate desperately want to stop, and still can't. That's not a character flaw. That's your brain running a very specific, very unhelpful survival strategy. Hi, I'm your good enough bloke. Today we're looking at a 2022 randomized controlled trial published in Frontiers in Psychology. That's the gold standard of study designs. Proper experimental conditions, a control group, statistical analysis, the works. The researchers were at Leuphana University in Germany, and they had one question. If you teach people to handle their emotions better, do they procrastinate less? First, the numbers. Between 80 and 95% of university students procrastinate regularly. About half do it at a level that actively damages their grades and well-being. And more than 95% wish they could stop. So almost everyone who procrastinates hates doing it and can't stop anyway. Which means the advice, just try harder, has been failing people for a very long time. The standard theory used to be that procrastination is a time management problem. Get a planner. Break tasks into smaller steps. Set a timer. This advice has been recycled for decades. It helps some people some of the time. It clearly doesn't solve the problem because 80 to 95% of students are still doing it every year. What this study argues is that procrastination is actually an emotion regulation problem. Here's the mechanism in plain English. You think about a task you don't want to do. Immediately, unpleasant feelings arrive. Anxiety, dread, boredom, self-doubt. Your brain identifies these feelings as a threat. It looks for an exit. You open your phone. The feelings disappear. Your brain registers this as a successful strategy and repeats it every single time. Researchers call this short-term mood repair. You're not avoiding the task. You're avoiding the feeling the task generates. The task is still sitting there. Your future self will deal with it, at higher stress, with less time. So the researchers ran an experiment. 148 university students randomly split into two groups. The first group got a 9-week online emotion regulation training called Stark Im Stress, roughly translates to strong under stress. The training covered practical skills, recognizing what you're feeling, tolerating discomfort without immediately escaping, adjusting unhelpful thought patterns, and building self-compassion. This was not a productivity course. It had nothing to do with task management. It was purely about emotions. The second group got nothing. They just waited. Classic control group. After 9 weeks, both groups were measured on a validated procrastination scale. The trained group reduced their procrastination significantly. The statistical effect was medium-sized. Not a miracle cure, but a real, meaningful change. The untreated group improved slightly too, which is normal in studies like this. But the gap between the groups was statistically significant. Then the researchers asked a more precise question. Why did it work? They ran what's called a mediation analysis, a statistical test that checks whether one thing is actually caused by another thing, rather than just happening at the same time. The result was clear. The reduction in procrastination was explained by the increase in emotion regulation skills. Better emotional skills led directly to less avoidance. That's a causal chain, not just a coincidence. One thing worth saying clearly, the participants were mostly German university students, predominantly female, with a high proportion studying psychology. Psychology students tend to be more conscientious than average. The researchers acknowledge this limits how broadly the findings apply. More replication is needed across different populations before we treat this as a universal answer. What it does suggest, practically, is this. The next time you're sitting in front of something you can't start, the problem probably isn't willpower or organization. There's likely a feeling underneath, anxiety, fear of failure, boredom, that you're trying to escape. Recognizing that feeling, naming it, and staying with it for a moment instead of immediately fleeing is how you interrupt the loop. Not because it's comfortable, because the loop is costing you more than the discomfort would. I haven't solved this myself. I made 2 cups of tea while writing this script, but I understand the mechanism now, and that's at least the beginning of something. Full citation in the description: Schunemann, Scherenberg, von Salisch, and Eckert. Frontiers in Psychology, 2022. If this was useful, a like takes 2 seconds, and it genuinely helps the channel reach people who need it. I'm your good enough bloke. See you next time.